Okay, if nuclear isn't feasible, what about coal? Capture and storage, same thing. Problems with large coal, efficiency drops significantly. It's uneconomic to capture all the CO2. Got the same issue of large power plants. You've got to store it. I think you've heard this in the previous session. Not very good sites. You're still throwing away 3/4 of the energy at the power station. Just to make the point, once you move to capture the CO2, your efficiency drops down hugely. So the amount of fuel you need for the same output goes up hugely. And these are the sorts of levels of emissions that you would see with CO2 capture. I think between 100 and 200 kilograms per megawatt hour. So not low emission particularly. And I think you haven't got time to go through the numbers, but if all of Australia's power came from clean coal, we would still exceed the 50 megatons of CO2 that we would need to achieve in 2050. So I'm moving on to decentralised electricity, just to talk about PV as one technology. Great thing about PV, low emission, no moving parts, no fuel costs, huge resource, widespread community acceptance, which we've heard already, no particulates, no thorium or uranium coming out of the technology use, as we'd heard before, can be utilised in otherwise unutilised spaces, potentially very low cost at large scale. Not without its problems, very high costs, we've seen that currently. Varies diurnally and with cloud cover. It's a diffuse resource. Can you actually scale it up to make a difference? Can you really put enough PV in actually to make a plant viable in Australia? The reason it's good power is because it's located where people need it. It doesn't have to be transmitted over long distances. And so it's competing with retail electricity prices, not wholesale. If the wholesale price is 10 cents a kilowatt hour, $100 a megawatt hour, retail would be at least double. And so PV can compete with that because it's being generated and competing with what you pay as a consumer, not the wholesale price.
Good. Next question, just there.
My name is Volker Gebhardt, UWS. My question is for Dr. Vassallo. You pointed out that the cost curves for photovoltaics are going to meet the electricity costs, and now undoubtedly that will lead to a large increase in the use of photovoltaics. However, if you want to cover the complete electricity demand using photovoltaics, there would be another, some very challenging technologies would have to be developed in order to cover, periods of clouds, to cover nights. So you'd have some infrastructure and also technology development, which is currently, I don't think, in the pipeline. I mean, you can use hydro power for storing electricity, but not on the scale of the base load. So you'd still need some sort of economically friendly method, at least more friendly than coal, in order to provide a base load at night, for example. What's your point of view there?
Yes, you're right to a point. I don't want to imply that solar alone can meet the demand, and it would be perhaps 20% of Australia's electricity production. Wind would also be up there, biomass, biogas, high efficiency gas combined cycle plant, and the rump end of the coal industry, which has the newer plants, which are then coming to the end of their life. And you're right, you can't depend on solar PV to provide 100% power all the time. But as you move into a distributed system with a grid interconnection, for example, you may be having very strong wind generation, as you would have today, for example, whereas the PV may be backing off by the end of the day. The wind source is still very strong. And so the further you have a variety of sources, the less likely that you're going to get into a position where you have a problem with one technology being either with cloud cover or no wind. And there is an experiment going on in Germany at the moment at Kassel, where they have hydro storage, PV, wind, gas-fired power plants meeting actually the needs of a small community, and they are looking at can this evolve to a larger scale, which they are obviously showing it can.
My name is Annie Nielsen. I'm from the Parramatta Climate Action Network, and my question is, we haven't heard anything about the water that is involved in a nuclear power station, and that's a major problem in Australia. Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
The water problems for a power station, whether it's nuclear or coal, are very similar. The difference that occurs at the moment, while there's a slightly higher use in nuclear, is that nuclear, as I mentioned, the old fleets of nuclear run at outlet temperatures around 300 degrees, so they're inherently less efficient than New South Wales coal power stations, which are some of the most efficient in the world, which are running around 570 degrees. Now, future nuclear is looking to high temperatures, the same supercritical temperatures as coal, or even going beyond it to 900. So, I mean, the modern nuclear power stations are only slightly more using water than a coal-fired power station. So the same issue applies there, and people are looking to using more air cooling than water cooling. And but I say it's an issue, but it's not just, that issue is not just fine for nuclear, and increasing efficiencies means you use less water to produce the same amount of electricity. But, you know,
Andrew, was there any prospective value in your fusion in terms of water usage?
I don't think so. It uses the same steam turbine technology. The cooling per se probably isn't the same as the core, but then that's a completely different problem. But once you've got down to a steam turbine, then it's that efficiency question which is the one you've got to answer. So it's much the same.
Okay.
Just a quick one, Andrew. The fusion reaction in the sun, can you remind us? I mean, there's no lithium blanket in the sun, presumably. Is it deuterium and tritium still?
Yes, well, and other things. It's actually a far more complicated reaction in the sun, but it's also at a much lower temperature because of the size of the sun. So whereas we have to get it up to 100 million or so, up there it's much less, more like 30, 40 million degrees.
So I think we need to bring things to a close, and I'd like to call upon Professor Beryl Hesketh, who is Dean of the UWS College of Health and Science and the Whitlam Institute's partner in this series.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, and thank you so much to our speakers. One of our aims with putting on this series was that we felt that we just needed to be a better informed community, and those of us that are in all sorts of different areas, not necessarily scientists, also need to know what the facts are as much as we can, so that as we go forward, we're able to assist, I think, in a democracy making the sorts of decisions that need to be made. And our feeling was we couldn't rely on sort of emotional reactions to any of the different options, that we just needed to look at them as carefully as we could. And I must say thank you so much to our speakers. George, thank you very much for bringing us, a hard look at this, but I think a fair examination of the different options. Andrew, it was such fun being able to look at some blue sky research, which may well turn out to provide something. One never knows. And it is good to see that countries are still prepared to invest in things which have got some return, but maybe fairly uncertain return, but nonetheless, I'm sure the spin-offs from that research will be in all sorts of different areas as well. And Tony, I think the contrast was exactly what we wanted in terms of a sort of a balanced approach to the issues. You've been able to do that for us tonight by saying, hey, let's look local instead of the big systems. So can you all join with me in thanking our speakers? And the next in the series is the Renewables, and we have Dr. Mark Dissendorf, the Institute of Environmental Studies from UNSW, Dr. Martin Poole, who's chair of the Energy Committee at the Warren Centre, and Andrea Gaffney, who's manager at BP Solar. So please tell your friends, come along, and we'll see what those sets of options have to provide for us. Thank you all.